The Simpsons is pretty well known for its wide cast of colorful side characters. One of these characters happens to be Moe Szyslak, a surly bartender who can never seem to catch a break. Though he can sometimes be a grouch and tends to favor his trusty shotgun, Moe isn't that bad of a guy. Well, he isn't usually, though sometimes his morality can slip up a bit. Other times he's the best friend and bartender that a guy like Homer could have. But of all of the things he's done throughout 32 seasons, which have been the best and which have been the worst? I'm Caleb with Wicked Binge, and this is Moe Szyslak Deeds Good to Evil. We should also mention that we're only counting canon examples. In other words, none of these deeds will be from the Treehouse of Horror episodes, or other canon episodes like Revenge is a Dish Best Served 3 Times. As always, we're starting out with the best and most good things that Moe has ever done, and we'll be working our way down to the not so good things. Our first deed comes to us from all the way back in Moe's childhood, refusing to sabotage another family business. In season 29, episode King Lear, we learned that Moe had a strained relationship with his father as a result of his past. Moe's father, along with Moe's younger brother and sister, ran a successful series of mattress stores. But naturally, success leads to rivalry and competition. One night, Moe's father asked him to put bed bugs on all of the rivals' mattresses. Moe nearly did this too, but refused to go through with it after seeing a picture of the rival chain's owner's family. Knowing how important having a business was to his own family, Moe didn't have the heart to ruin someone else's. While this was an incredibly moral choice, it ended up backfiring majorly when Szyslak's mattress rivals ended up planting bed bugs in his father's mattress store. This resulted in his father being forced to close many of his stores, and Moe fell into a distant, strained relationship with his father and siblings. Ouch. Definitely an example of doing the right thing not always being the easiest thing. Still, we have to give Moe credit for making the morally correct decision, even if it didn't work out great for him and his family. Even when he had the chance to rectify this mistake by putting bed bugs on his siblings' mattresses during their mattress store war, Moe still couldn't bring himself to do it, showing that he still has a good heart deep down. Next up, we have saving Homer's life. When he was younger, Moe was actually a professional boxer, though he was never too successful at it. He does get a second chance at fame, however, as Homer's boxing manager after the two discover just how good he is at taking a hit. Unfortunately, the two of them soon get way over their heads when Dredrick Tatum's manager, Lucius Sweet, comes looking for a fight. Moe immediately knows that Homer doesn't stand a chance, but quickly caves into Lucius's peer pressure. He tells himself, Homer, and Marge that Homer will be fine, but it's obvious that not even he believes that, and the guilt soon sets in once Homer starts getting pummeled by Tatum. But before the final punch can be thrown, Moe flies in and airlifts Homer out of the ring, saving his life. Moe even tells them that it doesn't matter if the fans are mad at him and that he only cares about Homer being alive and safe.
The only thing that matters to me is you're safe.
While we had to dock Moe a few points for purposely putting Homer in that situation in the first place, this was more due to pressure from Lucius than actual greed. It also takes a lot of guts to ruin your career for a friend, and after saving Homer, Moe actually uses his stolen paramotor to fly around the world, helping people out and saving others from natural disasters with his flight. Maybe it's technically an ending credits gag, but it's still nice to see from a guy like Moe. Coming to another Homer-related good deed, we have helping out Homer, Apu, and Reverend Lovejoy. Now, it's been firmly established that Moe is pretty lonely and often desperate for any sort of romantic affection. And yet, when he gets a chance to possibly hook up with one of 3 different wives, he manages to act selflessly. Talk about a surprise! In the season 21 episode Moe Letter Blues, Homer, Apu, and Rev Lovejoy all decide to take their kids on a Mother's Day ferry boat ride to give their wives a break from motherhood. Once on the ferry, however, they all receive a letter from Moe informing them that he is running off with one of their wives. Worried about their marriages, each of the husbands remembers a time where Moe confronted their wives, a moment where they could have been better husbands. No longer taking their marriages for granted, each of the men worry that their wives is going to be the one who runs off with Moe. But in a big twist, it is revealed that Moe, after seeing how troubled each of the relationships were, organized all of their reconciliations while at the same time teaching the men a lesson through his letter about valuing their wives. Honestly, it's crazy to think about all of the work Mo put in to save 3 marriages, 2 of which with people he isn't even that close with. But in a way, it makes sense that Mo wouldn't want anybody to be as lonely and miserable as he was, and really, that makes his huge gesture all the sweeter. Who would have thought a bartender could play Cupid? Moving on, we have being a father figure to Maggie. You would have never guessed that a guy like Mo would have a soft spot for kids, but not even he can resist the cuteness that is Maggie Simpson. In the episode Mo Baby Blues, Mo is once again feeling low enough that he actually decides to jump off a bridge and try to end it all. Before he can make that leap, however, Mo ends up accidentally saving Maggie's life after she gets flung out of the Simpsons' car. Because this was an accident, we can't really count it as a good deed, but we're gonna count everything else in this episode. After forming a bond with Maggie, Mo volunteers to babysit her. Through their little playdates, Mo acts as a father figure to her, teaching her things and playing with her. He even finds a way to make her laugh. With Mo doing so much and being so great at it, it's no wonder Homer becomes so jealous. Even after Homer and Marge forbid him from seeing Maggie, feeling overwhelmed by all of the time he had been spending at their house, Mo doesn't even hesitate to help when he hears that Maggie's been kidnapped by Fat Tony's gang. With how dangerous the Springfield Mafia is, Mo being willing to put himself in danger to save Maggie's life is definitely noble. Afterwards, Mo is allowed to babysit Maggie again, and while we don't see it too often in the show proper, following this episode, their adorable relationship still shows up in comics occasionally. We aren't sure if Mo's necessarily the best influence on a baby, but with how genuinely happy he makes her, we feel that this is still a good thing. Next up is letting go of a grudge. Maybe we're giving Mo a bit too much credit for this one, as it's less of a good deed and more of just showing mercy. Still, we feel it's something worth giving a mention to. In New Kid on the Block, Bart falls head over heels for the new neighbor girl, Laura. Unfortunately, Laura is an older girl who is into bad boys like Jimbo. When Bart learns this, he decides to get back at the bully using one of his best running gags. He prank calls Mo, and instead of just laughing and hanging up, he gives Mo his address as well as Jimbo's name, much to the bartender's delight. With a rusty knife in hand, Mo runs all the way to Evergreen Terrace ready to get his revenge. Jimbo, not being nearly as tough as Laura or Bart thought, cowers as soon as he sees Mo start to threaten him. Suddenly, all the anger Mo had for him just goes out the window, not having the heart to kill him or even cut him up a little. Seeing the teen in tears, Mo decides to just forget about any sort of revenge and go back to his bar. Now, Mo is a character that's very much defined by his anger, from screaming obscenities into the phone to wielding a shotgun. So seeing Mo just shrug off the chance to finally get revenge on who he thinks has been tormenting him for several months shows that this guy is more bark than bite. Even after he gets prank called again at the end of the episode, Mo doesn't go out looking for revenge and instead just follows his and Bart's usual routine. While we're sure he'll never not get angry at these calls, we can give Mo a bit of credit for not being harsh enough to actually follow through with these threats. Wrapping up this section, we want to give a mention to all the minor good deeds that Mo has done but doesn't necessarily want credit for. Given his grouchy, tough guy reputation, we can't exactly blame Mo for not wanting to reveal certain secrets about himself. Still, that's not gonna stop us from bringing them up. In the episode Homer Loves Flanders, we learn that on the nights when Moe's is closed, Mo actually goes to hospitals and soup kitchens to read to those in need. We get 2 brief scenes of this, first with him reading to a young sick girl, and then him reading Little Woman to a group of homeless men. He gets choked up in both of these scenes, showing off just how soft his heart is. Aww, not even him threatening Flanders can ruin these moments. Another good deed we hear about is from the episode Lisa's Pony. Apparently, when the owner of King Toot's music store and his wife were stuck in a flaming car, Mo actually pulled them out and saved their lives. That's really impressive for a guy like Mo, and it's even more admirable that he only brought it up when he was trying to get the owner to open up his store as a favor to Homer. Speaking of Homer, we'd also like to use this section to mention the fact that if it weren't for Mo being willing to hammer a crayon back into Homer's brain, Homer would have been stuck as a smart but lonely man forever isolated from his fellow dumb Springfieldians. We suppose that given how dangerous Homer's idiocy can be, it could be argued that this wasn't necessarily a good deed, but hey, it made Homer happy, so we're counting it.
That's right. I'm a surgeon.
Okay, that's all of Moe's good deeds, but like we said, this bartender can have a bit of a dark side to him. So let's take a look at all of his evil deeds, starting with the bad and working our way down to the most evil, flirting with Midge. Okay, so Moe's crush on Marge is pretty obvious, so obvious in fact that you'd have to be as dumb as Homer to not see it. His biggest attempt was in Season 5, Secrets of Successful Marriage, with Homer in the doghouse, or treehouse, for revealing his and Marge's intimate secrets to his marriage advice class. Moe sees it as his big chance. He swoops in with a bouquet of flowers and gets invited inside by Marge. It's clear that he's hoping to win her affections despite Marge politely turning him down, but immediately backs off when a disheveled Homer comes back into the house not wanting to get beaten up. But while he may not actively go after Marge while Homer is still around, he still tries to subtly stay close to her in the meantime just in case Homer is taken out of the picture. At one point, it was revealed that Moe had bugged the Simpsons home in order to overhear Marge. Ironically enough, Moe himself was being monitored by the FBI for this. So yeah, Moe can have some pretty stalkerish behavior, and these tendencies really don't do much to help with his romantic life. It's also implied that Marge isn't the only woman that he's stalked. But while we can't excuse these creepy and gross actions, we can be thankful that they aren't worse. Next on the list is stealing Homer's drink idea. In the classic episode Flaming Moe's, Homer shares a homemade drink with Moe after his beer supply gets cut off. The drink is certainly an interesting one, being a mix of various leftover liquors and Krusty the Clown brand cough syrup that, for whatever reason, tastes great after being lit on fire. With how delicious the drink is, it doesn't take long for people to start to take an interest in it, and Moe doesn't even hesitate to take credit for the idea. Homer's disappointment and anger at this is pretty obvious, but any remorse Moe may have for stealing his drink feels hollow. Moe barely gives Homer a second thought and immediately goes into trying to merchandise himself and turn his bar into the hottest place in town. This drives Homer into near insanity, but again, Moe can't really seem to care too much and doesn't even notice when Homer says he's lost himself a customer. It takes a guilt trip from his waitress/girlfriend Colette for Moe to agree to sell his drink and split the money made from it with Homer, though he's hardly happy about it. Of course, Homer spills the beans and Moe's tavern once again falls into obscurity. We're putting this deed on the higher end of bad, since Moe did try to make things right, even if he was reluctant about it. We should also add that despite costing him $1 million, Moe isn't that angry with Homer, possibly seeing it as a justified punishment for himself. It would have been easy for Moe to continue the cycle of revenge, but the fact he invites Homer back into the tavern with open arms says a lot. Up next, we have planning insurance fraud. Whenever Moe actually manages to get a girlfriend, he usually ends up completely spoiling them. His girlfriend Renee was no exception, with Moe taking her on pricey dates and even giving her expensive gifts. But a bartender's money doesn't last forever, and when Moe becomes worried that Renee will leave him once she realizes he's broke, he and Homer come up with an insurance fraud scheme involving Moe's car. Now, to be fair, Moe's original plan didn't put Homer in any real danger. It was still shady and illegal, but it wasn't personally awful to his best friend. Moe crosses that line when Homer screws up the plan and gets caught by the police. Not wanting to get thrown in jail himself, Moe throws Homer under the bus and even uses the money that would have gone towards Homer's bail on a trip to Hawaii with Renee. Moe does feel guilty eventually and confesses to Renee, but even then, he's more than willing to try a zany scheme involving faking their deaths than to actually be honest and serve his time. While he was never completely heartless in this episode, still showing guilt for what he did to Homer, his insistence on trying to be sneaky and deceitful paints a not too pretty picture of his morality. Unfortunately, this isn't the only crime that Moe's done that had a serious effect on somebody. Speaking of which, turning Snake into a thief for life. Yes, everyone's favorite jailbird wasn't always a crook. In the episode The Seemingly Never-Ending Story, we see Moe's brief summer romance with the new girl in town, Edna Krabappel, who had just moved to Springfield to start teaching. When the two have a chance to leave Springfield together, Moe realizes that he doesn't exactly have the funds to start over. That is, until Snake, Then a polite idealistic archaeologist comes in with his latest find, a big bag of ancient Mayan gold coins. Being the honest man that he is, Snake originally plans on donating the coins to a museum. But with Snake's hotel being just across the street from the tavern, Mo seizes his opportunity and steals the coins from Snake. Once he realizes that he's been robbed, and angered and bitter, Snake states that he's going to take revenge on the world. Though by world, he actually just means convenience store owners. Either way, he begins a life of crime, and it's all Mo's fault. Even if Snake's not a huge threat, his burglaries and robberies still cause a bit of damage. Even worse still is that after Mo and Edna break up, Mo doesn't even try to return the gold coins. He just puts them in his jukebox, playing his and Edna's favorite song over and over. While you feel bad for the guy, you can't help but feel like maybe it's what he deserves for having a hand in creating Springfield's most infamous thief. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention all of the illegal activities that Mo seems to always be holding in his bar. No matter how many times Mo tries to pretty up his tavern and turn it into a respectable place of business, he can never seem to hide just how shady the place really is. Over the years, we've seen Mo either initiate or turn a blind eye to some pretty big crimes. This has included smuggling pandas and orcas, hosting Russian roulette games in his back room, and operating an unlicensed casino. We should also mention that when Prohibition was briefly established in Springfield, Mo had no hesitations in running a speakeasy, opening it almost immediately with Homer's help. Looking at all of this, it's obvious that while Mo may have a moral compass when it comes to his friends and people that he likes, he tends to see the actual law as just a friendly suggestion. This is especially evident in that it isn't always clear whether or not he has an actual liquor license. And if he does, it's usually mentioned to be expired. While calling him a full-on villain would be an over-exaggeration, we can't deny that Mo is definitely a criminal, at least partially. To finish off our list, we have Mo's worst deed, killing the original Alfalfa. Okay, we know that this was most likely meant to be just a joke based on how absurd it is. Still, it's certainly one of the more memorable flashbacks from Mo's life, and we're sure you guys would bring it up in the comments if we didn't mention it here. So, here we go. In Season 7's Radioactive Man, the town of Springfield is in a buzz, excited to be the setting of the new Radioactive Man movie. With Hollywood on everyone's mind, Mo decides to bring up a fun fact about himself to his barflies, revealing that as a child, he had been part of the Little Rascals. Young Mo played the role of the tough kid, Smelly, whose running gag would be looking into an exhaust pipe and getting a face full of soot. One day, the kid who played Alfalfa decided to steal Mo's joke during a scene, and Mo, having some pretty big anger issues even as a kid, attacks him.
He's killed the original Alfalfa!
Through beating him up, he accidentally kills the kid, ruining his own career at the same time. It's a pretty dark scene, but it's the Simpsons brand of dark comedy, so it works. Again, it's a pretty absurd scene too, so it's easy to laugh at. As for how it applies to Mo though, he did a pretty awful thing he clearly regrets what he did. You could also argue that as a kid, he didn't realize his own strength and didn't mean to hurt Alfalfa that badly. For those reasons, we're able to cut old Mo a bit of slack, but we still have to call it the worst thing he's ever done. Well, we think that's enough Mo Sislak for today, but let us know in the comment section if you agree with our list and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality of characters in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.